You ever just stop and think about the fact that you're, well, aware? Like, what is this inner experience, this stream of consciousness?
It's probably the biggest mystery there is, really. We all live it every second. But explaining it, that's the tricky part.
Absolutely. And, that's exactly what we want to dive into today. We're looking at this really interesting book, Consciousness is the Water We Swim In. Great title.
It is a good title. It hints at the book's whole approach, doesn't it? It's not just sticking to, say, neuroscience or philosophy.
Exactly. It pulls from everywhere, science, philosophy, even some mystical stuff, which is intriguing.
Which you almost have to do with consciousness, right? It's too big for just one perspective. It's like the elephant and the blind man. Everyone grabs a different part.
Spot on. So our mission here is to pull out the key ideas from the book, what consciousness is, why it matters, but, keep it engaging, not get too bogged down.
Yeah, find those core insights. What can we actually take away about this thing that's always with us, but we barely notice?
And that's the central analogy right there, isn't it? Consciousness as the water we swim in.
Like a fish. It lives in water, depends on water, but does it ever really think about the water?
Probably not. It's just the background, the medium for everything else.
And that's the point about consciousness. It's the medium for all our experiences, every thought, feeling, sensation. It's so fundamental it becomes invisible.
Okay, so let's unpack that a bit more, this invisible medium. What are the implications of us being like these fish?
Well, the main thing is that it's the foundation. Everything you perceive, everything you feel, it all happens within consciousness. It's the lens, not just the picture.
Which creates that weird paradox the book mentions.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to use our consciousness to understand consciousness itself.
Right. It's inherently self-referential, like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror.
The book has that exercise, doesn't it? Close your eyes and ask, who's observing these thoughts?
Yeah, and then who's observing that observer? You can get into this sort of infinite loop. It shows how consciousness is both the tool and the object of study.
It makes you wonder if our usual scientific methods, observing things out there, can ever fully capture something so internal.
That's a huge debate. And it leads some thinkers, as the book notes, to question if consciousness is purely physical. Maybe there's something more to it.
Because it's hard to get from, like, neurons firing to the actual feeling of redness or the taste of chocolate.
Exactly. That subjective quality, what philosophers call qualia, that's the real puzzle.
The book drives this home with that thought experiment. Imagine a world identical to ours, physically, but with no conscious beings, no inner life.
Would colors still seem bright? Would music evoke emotion? It suggests these qualities arise through consciousness. Without it, the richness just disappears.
So if it's that fundamental, why don't we notice it more? Why aren't we walking around amazed by our own awareness all the time?
Well, the book points to a couple of things. Evolutionarily, survival was about focusing outwards, right? Finding food, avoiding danger, not deep introspection.
Makes sense. Your brain develops shortcuts to deal with the world efficiently.
And then there's our culture. We tend to value doing, achieving, practical thinking, pondering the nature of being. That's often seen as less practical.
Yeah, a bit abstract. The book even mentions trying that simple thing.
Yeah.
Just watch your breath for 5 minutes.
And what happens? Your mind wanders off almost immediately. It shows how easily we get caught up in the contents of our thoughts rather than the space they appear in.
So we're distracted from the medium by the messages flowing through it.
That's a good way to put it. We miss the container for the contents.
Okay, so how does the book start to give us a handle on defining this slippery concept?
It offers a kind of working definition. Consciousness as the basic capacity to have experiences to perceive, feel, think, and crucially, to be aware that you are doing so.
And it breaks it down into levels.
Yes, sort of layers of awareness. There's basic awareness, just raw sensation, like feeling warmth or hearing a noise, simple presence.
Okay.
Then there's self-awareness, recognizing yourself as a distinct individual, the classic mirror test, knowing that's me. And then the really interesting one, meta-awareness. Being aware of your awareness, thinking about your own thoughts, reflecting on your feelings.
Ah, that recursive loop again. Being aware that you are aware.
Exactly. And that seems uniquely human, or at least highly developed in humans.
So wrapping up this first bit, the idea is consciousness is fundamental, it's often overlooked, and exploring it needs patience and curiosity. It's the essence of us.
Precisely. It's setting the stage for a deeper look, inviting us to notice the water we're swimming in.
Right. And from there, the book takes this amazing journey through history.
Hmm.
How have people tried to understand this across different cultures and times? It's like joining a very old conversation.
It really is, and what's fascinating is seeing both the recurring themes and the unique perspectives each tradition brings.
Let's start way back. Hermeticism. What's the core idea there?
Hermeticism, with roots in ancient Egypt and Greece, has this foundational principle. All is mind. The universe is mental.
Whoa. Okay, so not just that we have minds, but reality itself is mental.
That's the core idea. Consciousness isn't just in the universe, it is the universe in a sense. Everything arises from a universal mind or consciousness.
And that links to as above, so below.
Yes. The microcosm reflects the macrocosm. Understanding your own mind gives you insight into the cosmic mind, and vice versa.
Okay, moving forward a bit. Kabbalah, the
Yeah.
Jewish mystical tradition. How does that fit in?
Kabbalah looks for the deeper meanings within the Torah. It speaks of Ein Sof, the infinite, unknowable divine source, and the tree of life, which maps how consciousness emanates down into creation.
So a kind of unfolding of awareness from the divine.
Kind of, yes. And there's this concept of tikkun olam, repairing the world. The idea is that by refining our own consciousness through ethical actions and inner work, we actually help heal or complete the world.
I like that connection between inner work and outer effect.
Yeah.
What about Sufism within Islam?
Sufism is all about the direct experience of the divine, often through love and devotion. Key ideas are fana, the annihilation or dissolving of the ego, the sense of separate self.
Losing yourself.
In a way, yes. Losing the limited self to find baka subsistence, or abiding in God, in the ultimate reality. Merging individual consciousness with the universal.
And the unity of being.
The idea that ultimately everything is a manifestation of the one divine reality. Again, this theme of unity.
Keeps popping up. Okay, Gnosticism, early Christian mysticism.
Gnostics emphasized gnosis, direct, intuitive knowledge over just belief. They believed there's a divine spark within each person, kind of trapped or asleep in the material world.
And awakening comes from.
Inner revelation, finding that direct knowledge within yourself, waking up that spark.
Then there's Theosophy, which seems like a more modern synthesis.
Right. Founded by Helena Blavatsky in the 19th century, it explicitly tried to blend Eastern and Western spiritual ideas, a big emphasis on universal brotherhood.
Because we're all connected by.
A single underlying consciousness. They also brought in ideas like reincarnation and karma, focusing on the soul's journey and evolution through many lives.
Shifting east now. Vedanta, particularly Advaita Vedanta from India.
Advaita means non-dual. Its core teaching is that Brahman, the ultimate infinite reality, and Atman, the individual soul or self, are not two, but one.
So my deepest self is the ultimate reality.
Essentially, yes. The apparent separation and the material world, Maya, are seen as a kind of illusion or misperception that hides this fundamental unity. Liberation is realizing that oneness.
And Tibetan Buddhism?
Vajrayana.
Tibetan Buddhism has incredibly sophisticated practices for working with the mind. The view is that the mind's fundamental nature is already pure, luminous awareness, sometimes described as empty, yet aware.
Empty not as in nothing, but empty of inherent limitations.
Exactly. Empty of fixed self, open potential. Practices like Dita Yoga, visualizing enlightened beings, are ways to connect with and realize that enlightened nature within yourself.
It's incredible how these ancient traditions converged on similar themes of unity and inner realization. What about Western philosophy before, say, the Enlightenment? Plato, Aristotle. Well, Plato talked about a higher realm of ideal forms, suggesting our physical reality is just a shadow, and true understanding comes from grasping those perfect ideals through reason.
So mind connects to a higher reality.
And Aristotle linked consciousness to the soul, the animating force of a living thing. Later, Plotinus and the Neoplatonists described reality emanating outwards from the one, this ultimate source, with human consciousness being a reflection of it.
Then the Enlightenment arrives, and things seem to shift towards reason and the individual mind more.
Big time. You get Descartes, I think, therefore I am, cogito ergo sum. He really put self-awareness front and center, but also famously proposed mind-body dualism. Mind is thinking stuff, body is physical stuff. Separate.
Which caused philosophical headaches for centuries.
Didn't it just? Then you have empiricists like John Locke saying, no, the mind starts as a blank slate, a tabula rasa. All knowledge comes from experience through the senses.
Nature versus nurture, almost.
Kind of. And then Immanuel Kant tries to bridge the gap. He agreed experience is key, but argued our minds aren't just passive receivers. They have built-in structures, concepts like space, time, causality, that actively organize our experience.
So the mind shapes reality as we perceive it.
Yes, it's not just taking things in, it's actively constructing our perceived world based on sensory input plus these innate structures.
This really paves the way for modern science trying to tackle the mind, doesn't it?
Absolutely. You start seeing attempts to apply scientific methods, though initially you get things like behaviorism, which kind of sidestepped consciousness altogether.
Right, just focusing on observable behavior. Input, output.
Yeah.
No messy internal states.
Exactly. But eventually, neuroscience starts developing tools to look inside the brain, mapping brain activity, correlating it with conscious states.
And that leads us right up to the hard problem.
The hard problem, coined by David Chalmers. Even if we map all the brain activity perfectly, how and why does that physical processing feel like anything? Why the subjective experience? That's the gap science still struggles with.
And the book touches on where the debate is now. Things like panpsychism.
Yeah, contemporary ideas. Panpsychism is the view that maybe consciousness isn't limited to complex brains. Maybe it's a fundamental property of matter itself down to particles.
Oh, okay.
Then there's integrated information theory, IIT, trying to mathematically measure consciousness based on how integrated a system's information is.
And quantum theories.
More speculative stuff, like the OR theory, suggesting quantum effects in brain microtubules are key, all trying to bridge that explanatory gap.
What a trip through history. The key takeaway seems to be this question of consciousness is incredibly persistent, and maybe we need insights from all these different angles.
I think that's right. The questions remain similar, but the tools and frameworks evolve. It shows the depth of the mystery.
Okay, so after that historical sweep, the book dives into the modern scientific approaches. What are we learning from neuroscience, AI, quantum physics today?
Yeah, it shifts gears to what we can actually measure and test, or at least model. Neuroscience is obviously huge here.
So, mapping the brain. What are some key theories the book mentions? Global workspace theory.
Right. GWT suggests consciousness is what happens when information gets broadcast across a wide network in the brain, making it available to many different processing areas simultaneously.
It's like shining a spotlight on information so different parts of the brain can work with it.
It's a common analogy, yeah. Think about reading right now. Visual input, language processing, memory access, attention, they all seem to come together in your conscious experience. GWT proposes a mechanism for that integration.
Makes sense. What about the default mode network, the DMN?
The DMN is interesting. It's a network that's most active when we're not focused on the outside world, when we're mind-wandering, thinking about ourselves, the past, the future, kind of our internal chatter network.
And it's linked to things like mindfulness.
Yes, studies suggest mindfulness meditation tends to quiet down the DMN. And interestingly, an overactive DMN is sometimes linked to things like depression or anxiety, maybe too much rumination.
Fascinating. So, quieting that network might lead to a different quality of awareness. More present.
That seems to be the implication, less caught up in self-referential loops. The book also covers the conscious versus unconscious processing distinction.
Right, the idea that a lot happens under the hood before we're even aware of it. Like decisions being made split seconds before we feel like we made them.
Exactly. Classic experiments seem to show brain activity initiating an action before the person consciously decides to act. Raises big questions about free will.
Yeah, slightly unnerving. It suggests our conscious experience might sometimes be playing catch-up or maybe rationalizing things after the fact.
It's a complex picture, and again, neuroscience maps these correlations. This brain activity goes with this experience, but it still grapples with the hard problem, the why of subjective feeling.
Okay, shifting to AI, the big sci-fi question. Can machines become conscious? What does the book say about the scientific possibilities?
It lays out both sides. The pro-argument often hinges on complexity. If consciousness arises from complex information processing in brains, maybe a sufficiently complex AI could achieve it too.
So it's about the pattern of processing, not the biological wetware.
That's one view. Theories like IIT, which focus on information integration, could potentially apply to machines as well as brains.
But there are strong counterarguments.
Definitely. Many argue that consciousness might be tied specifically to biological processes, something unique to life. Maybe it requires the specific chemistry or structure of neurons.
Like Searle's Chinese room argument. Just manipulating symbols doesn't equal understanding or awareness.
Exactly. That thought experiment highlights the difference between syntax, following rules like a computer, and semantics, genuine meaning and understanding. Can a machine truly understand or just simulate understanding?
And the ethical side is massive if we ever did create conscious AI.
Huge. Rights, responsibilities, control. The book touches on how we need to grapple with those questions very carefully.
Now for the really out there stuff. Quantum mechanics. How might that relate to consciousness?
This is more speculative territory. Some theories, like Orch-Orr, proposed by Penrose and Hameroff, suggest quantum phenomena happening inside neurons, specifically in microtubules, are crucial for consciousness.
So consciousness isn't just classical computation in the brain, but involves quantum effects.
That's the idea. They argue classical physics can't explain the richness or the non-computable aspects they see in consciousness. Others draw parallels between quantum entanglement or non-locality and feelings of interconnectedness.
But the book notes this is still pretty controversial, right?
Very much so. There's debate about whether the brain is actually warm, wet, and noisy for delicate quantum states to survive and be relevant at that scale. It lacks strong experimental proof right now.
So it's an intriguing idea, but maybe not mainstream neuroscience yet.
Not yet, no. Then the book contrasts emergence with consciousness as a fundamental force.
Okay, emergence being.
The idea that consciousness arises from the complex interactions of non-conscious parts, like how wetness emerges from H2O molecules which aren't individually wet. Consciousness is seen as a property of complex systems like brains.
But the problem there is still explaining qualia, the subjective feel.
Right. Why does that specific complex pattern feel like this? Emergence doesn't automatically solve that, which leads back to
Panpsychism. Maybe consciousness isn't emergent, but fundamental, present all the way down.
that's the alternative view explored, that some basic form of consciousness or proto-consciousness is a property of matter itself, and it combines or gets more complex in systems like brains.
It avoids the problem of consciousness suddenly popping into existence at some level of complexity.
It does, but critics argue it's hard to test or that it risks anthropomorphizing basic matter. It's a very active area of philosophical debate.
Finally, the book touches on the limits of science itself here, the subjective nature of it all.
Yes, the fundamental challenge of measuring first-person experience using third-person methods. Science excels at objectivity, but consciousness is inherently subjective. How do you objectively measure the feeling of seeing red?
You can measure brain waves, but not the redness itself.
Exactly. The book mentions approaches like phenomenology, carefully studying lived experience and neurophenomenology, trying to correlate detailed first-person reports with brain data to bridge that gap.
So where does all this scientific exploration leave us?
With incredible progress, but also deep remaining mysteries. The book emphasizes the need for interdisciplinary work, neuroscientists talking to philosophers, talking to physicists, talking to psychologists.
And points to future directions.
Yeah, things like studying altered states via psychedelics, developing better brain-computer interfaces, using VR to probe experience, all trying to get new angles on the problem. The takeaway is we need to synthesize all these perspectives.
Okay, so bringing this all together then. We started with consciousness as this invisible water we swim in.
Fundamental, but often unnoticed.
We journeyed through how history, philosophy, and mysticism tried to understand it, often pointing towards unity or inner realization.
Seeing recurring themes across cultures.
And now we've seen how modern science is tackling it with tools like neuroscience and AI, uncovering amazing things about the brain, but still facing that core hard problem of subjective experience.
And exploring cutting-edge, sometimes controversial, ideas like panpsychism and quantum consciousness.
The core message seems to be this constant invitation, echoing the book's title, to just become more aware of this awareness itself, to notice the water.
Yes, to turn attention not just outwards but inwards, towards the very nature of the experiencing self.
So maybe a final thought for everyone listening. Considering all these perspectives, the historical depths, the scientific frontiers, how might that shift how you think about your own moment-to-moment experience? What new questions pop up for you about this water you're swimming in right now?
It's really an invitation to start your own personal deep dive, isn't it, into the nature of your own mind.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for exploring this with us today. It's been fascinating.